Tonight on Talking Points, no more mugshots. Governor Cuomo's latest budget for New York giving law enforcement more discretion over the distribution of booking photos. The mixed responses to the new policy.
And later, more Democrats on the field. Former VP Joe Biden announcing his presidential bid this week, while former New York 24 congressional candidate Dana Balter gears up for another run against incumbent John Katko.
But first, a roadmap to obstruction. Special counsel Robert Mueller's bombshell 450-page report reverberating through Capitol Hill. Leaders are still bracing from the fallout. All that and more tonight on Talking Points.
If proven, which hasn't been proven yet, some of this, if proven, some of this would be impeachable, yes.
Redacted version of the long-awaited Mueller report is now available to the public. And we're just learning tonight that the House Judiciary Committee is issuing a subpoena for former White House counsel Don McGahn. Good evening. I'm Gilat Melamed.
And I'm Elijah Shama. The Mueller investigation is complete, and it established that Russians made sweeping and systematic interference efforts in the 2016 election. It also did not find sufficient evidence of coordination efforts between the Trump campaign and Russians.
Despite the lack of charges, the probe did send 12 unknown referrals, meaning even though Mueller's report is in, the effects of his investigation might stick around for a while. Talking Points analyst Jack Watson is here in studio with a rundown of what the report's shaking up in Washington. Jack?
Well, Gilat, that's right. Just 4 days after the release of his full redacted report, the dust has settled a bit, and we know some more important specifics about Robert Mueller's report on Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. But first, the overarching results here. First, the report says the president is not being charged by the investigation, but his claim that the report found, quote, no collusion isn't quite accurate. More accurately, the probe does not find sufficient evidence to fit the high legal standard of coordination beyond a reasonable doubt. The issue of obstruction is still unclear, but there are still 12 unknown investigations going on as a result of the probe so far. We'll get into that a little later, but for now, here's a few big takeaways besides the main things we've hit on so far. Aside from all the talk of what the Trump campaign did or did not do, one thing is made certain by this report. The Russian government made a, quote, sweeping and systematic effort to interfere in the 2016 election. Now, moving gears to a potential obstruction of justice charge, which we've been hearing a lot about. A name you'll need to remember is former White House counsel Don McGahn, who we just learned is being subpoenaed by Congress. His decision not to fire Robert Mueller when directed by the president could have helped save Trump's presidency and a potential tangible case of obstruction. We also learned that the president was upset by Jeff Sessions' recusal back in 2017 from the investigation and wanted Sessions to publicly proclaim the president's innocence. Now, because of the 12 unknown charges right now by Mueller and company, while the investigation is over, we could still feel the effect of the report for quite some time, Gilat.
Jack, now that we're a few days removed from the release, what has the reaction been?
Well, the reaction from both sides has been mixed. I'm going to divide it into two large categories, excuse me. Trump supporters and anti-Trump Republicans and Democrats. Now, the Trump supporter side has said that the investigation is the result of a politically motivated witch hunt, and the fact that it turned up nothing is just the fact that the establishment's talking heads on Capitol Hill did not like Trump's presidency, and this is what Rudy Giuliani had to say in an interview with Jake Tapper.
There's nothing wrong with taking information from Russians.
Well, we unfortunately couldn't get that, Elijah.
And speaking of that, a lot of Democrats are starting to call for impeachment proceedings. You saw Elizabeth Warren lay out her roadmap. What is the future of impeachment for Democrats?
Well, it's an interesting decision Democrats are weighing right now because the political gains, it's all going to be political, Elijah. The political gains from impeachment are obvious. They can campaign in 2020 by saying this president has been impeached, his presidency is maligned by this Mueller investigation. We can use that as a talking point the Democrats are saying to themselves. But also, an impeachment effort is likely going to be unsuccessful because the Senate, who would vote to remove the president from office if the obstruction charge was confirmed, it's controlled by Republicans, 51 plus Mike Pence. So, the political implications of this are going to be very interesting to look at.
And aside from that, looking ahead to 2020, what will the Mueller report's impact be on that?
Well, 2020, like you said, Elijah, we're already starting to see Elizabeth Warren talking about impeachment proceedings. It's going to be an interesting thing to look at because we have so many candidates, Biden about to be the 20th candidate entering the race, what they say about President Trump. And I'm sure that's going to come up in tonight's town halls on CNN. And I think that what you're going to see is, in order to malign the president, in order to sort of create a stronger point on the campaign trail, you're going to start to see a lot of Democrats start to push for that.
All right, Jack, and quickly, are we going to see something that can classify as obstruction come out later?
Well, that depends on what these 12 investigations turn up. We already know that there are 2 investigations that we know in the public, Michael Cohen and Greg Craig, the former Obama White House counsel. Now, I think that what you could see moving forward is, an effort by maybe an aggressive prosecutor to pursue obstruction charges. But, that's, of course, up in the air. We don't really know what those 12 investigations are.
Right, and then obstruction's the big thing. Any other big things we've learned?
Well, I think, not to get into it too deep here, but the president's reaction to all this within the White House, confiding in some of the closest people to him. He said that, quote, it was the end of his presidency. According to the Mueller report, he had some strong words about the Mueller report and tried, and his people defied him in his efforts to sort of get Robert Mueller fired, at least the report says.
All right,
And
thank
we're going
you.
to have to leave it there. The community grid option to replace I-81 in Syracuse has a new endorsement. The New York Department of Transportation, the state DOT, released its environmental impact statement detailing each of the replacement options for the viaduct, and they tapped the grid as the best for the future of the city and its residents. Here to break down the expected release and its ramifications are Talking Points analysts Greg Bradbury and Anthony Dabbundo. So, turning to both of you, why did the Department of Transportation say the grid was the best option for Syracuse?
It's essentially a process of elimination, right? They went through all of the options. They spent the last 6 years, $37 million to figure out what is the best option. And they ultimately said, okay, the tunnel option, look, to build a tunnel under the entire city of Syracuse, the amount of money, 11 years, $4.9 billion, that's an exorbitant amount of money to spend. And the amount of repossession they would have to do of the properties that the tunnel would be going under was just too much. And to rebuild the viaduct, it's been so costly already, and it's already starting to break down, that to have to keep up that maintenance just was not worth it for them in the long run. So they ultimately said the community grid is the smartest option, the cheapest option, and the most effective option.
And that's what the state says, but what are people in the community saying? What are people here at the university saying about what the grid will do for them?
Yeah, well, right here in the city, the goal of the grid has always been to bring the community back together. You know, looking back at history, it really divided the city when it was first brought about. And while they can't rewrite the wrongs of 50 years ago, they're hoping that bringing this grid back into play will help bring that community back together. Now, earlier today, Mayor Ben Walsh released a statement saying he was pleased with the environmental impact statement's findings and supporting the community grid.
And SU and SUNY ESF, all of the universities have come out in favor of the community grid as well. And it's important to note that, you know, based on where Syracuse University is, the potential for student housing and the potential for more student access to downtown Syracuse is a big plus potential for the community and for the campus, because that can help kind of bridge the gap, as Greg was saying.
So we have all these supporters, so we have all of this kind of new revenue that could be brought in by the grid. What are the next steps for actually putting a grid in place?
Yeah, well, right now it's going to take about 5 years to build, and the cost is going to be about $1.9 billion. Now that cost is up from the $1.3 billion that they originally anticipated. However, it is still under budget. Now, in the meantime, 481 will be used for through traffic, although the current viaduct will still be used and will still have some replacements so that it can be used until that full rebuild begins to take place.
All right, guys, 50 years under I-81. It'll be interesting to see how the next 50 years in Syracuse play out. Thanks so much. Major part of the latest New York State budget is the so-called mugshot ban. However, it's not really a blanket ban. It gives police discretion over whether mugshots are released, and that's leading to a lot of mixed reactions. Talking Points analyst Brandon Ross joins us to explain different responses to this new bill. Brandon, thanks for being here. And what is the purpose of this ban?
Well, the main reason is sort of to try to protect the innocent. There are a lot of mugshots taken. They're not necessarily all going to be guilty people. And there are a lot of websites out there that it's kind of called high-tech extortion, where they'll get all these mugshots en masse, put them up, and charge removal fees so that people can have them taken down, and that can really damage people because mugshots don't really go away if they're on the internet. And obviously, there's also the issue of the media use of mugshots, and there have been studies over the years to show that a lot of the media use of mugshots tends to be biased against African Americans. They get a little less of a fair shake than most white Americans do.
So having said that, what has been the police response to this ban?
You see a lot of different responses from varying police departments around the state. Rochester Police Department says they will comply. The state police force will as well. But then you have places like Wayne County in New York. Not only are they not going to comply, they're going to actively work to make an app to make it easier to find mugshots within the county. I find that particularly interesting, but most places are sort of mixing their reactions. Others are going to make themselves available upon media requests just for the sake of transparency as
And
well.
what about here in Syracuse? What can we expect?
So the Syracuse Police Department, CitrusTV reached out to them earlier today, and they say they are complying with the ban in the new bill.
All right. Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you. And next on Talking Points, President Trump is issuing the second veto of his presidency last week, refusing to end the U.S. involvement in Yemen's civil war, and how one presidential candidate is fighting back. Back after the break.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
Did you hear about the pony with a sore throat? He was a little horse. Can I tell you a cat joke? Just kidding. Why couldn't the Why was the basketball court all wet? Why? Because the players kept dribbling all over it. Where'd the cats go on vacation? New York.
They call me Maxie, but I prefer tripod. I was your above-average four-legged homie, and then wham, bam, minivan. Some people pity me. Now that's lame. I still run, fetch, and swim. And the ladies love me. I'm the ultimate wingman. Just don't ask me to high five.
On Wednesday, former Vice President Joe Biden will reportedly begin his presidential campaign. Biden is joining a crowded 2020 field with 20 Democrats running for president. And local races are heating up too. Dana Balter is trying to unseat John Katko for a second time. Here to break all this down is Talking Points analyst Michael Furnari. Michael, third time's the charm for Biden, or at least that's what he's hoping. How does he stack up this time around?
Well, he kind of fits into an interesting position in this 2020 field. Now, right now, Bernie Sanders is really leading the pack in that group. And I think Joe Biden fits into an interesting space because he's going to occupy a moderate voice. He's going to be a little bit more of a familiar face. Now, of course, Democrats did try to go for a little bit of that Barack Obama nostalgia in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. We'll see if they're willing to do that a second time or if they're going to look for somebody a little bit more progressive. But Biden right now, the key for him is name recognition because there's so many candidates running that it's divided in so many different ways. Somebody like Joe Biden who is so recognizable, that's going to be a very interesting spot for him because he is recognizable and he's got a big fan base in terms of voters, whereas a lot of these other candidates are really struggling to kind of find their niche.
So Biden has that fan base, but with that fan base comes a little bit of baggage. He's facing some allegations. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Now, there were some kind of people have known about a lot of the stuff that Joe Biden has been accused of for a long time, but it seemed like it all came to a head about in the last month and a half or so. But I think what we've learned from a lot of these scandals is that if you survive the initial week or two, if you kind of wait out that first storm and you stick around after that, it seems like people can kind of find their place. You've seen that with Ralph Northam. We saw that in Virginia. And so I think that's not really going to dog him too much. Right now he's second in the polling numbers, and it seems like he's going to be holding steady in that area.
20 Democrats, but 2 Republicans, which is almost just as interesting.
Absolutely. Now, Bill Weld, who is the governor of Massachusetts, he is going to be running against Donald Trump. He announced that very recently. Now, I think Bill Weld's going to have a very tough time, primarily because he's from such a small state. So it's not as if John Kasich would be a guy that people looked at because he's from Ohio. He could maybe try to rally that base. But the problem for Bill Weld is that Donald Trump is at about a 90% approval right now with Republicans.
That's going to be hard to beat. But here in Syracuse, we have another Republican who's pretty hard to beat, and one of his old challengers is back in the running.
Absolutely. Dana Balter is going to be running for a second term. And CitrusTV was fortunate enough to speak with Dana Balter at her announcement. We got to hear from her on what she thinks of her chances for the second time around.
And like most people that I know, people all across this district, I am frustrated with what's happening in Washington. Came closer to beating John Katko than anybody ever has. And we actually did remarkably well in our rural communities. And it shows that in our rural communities, just like everywhere else across the district, people are hungry for someone who's going to do what's best for them.
What do you think?
I think she's going to have a tough time. She lost by 6 points the last time. It seems like it's going to be an uphill battle for her so far.
All right, Michael, definitely one to watch. And the Supreme Court is discussing the constitutionality of denying a trademark on the F word. The court's challenger says the denial infringes on his First Amendment rights. SCOTUS Focus correspondent Shruti Marathe is here to break down the case.
In 1990, Eric Brunetti created a clothing line spelled F-U-C-T. In response to the line's success, Brunetti applied to get a trademark on the phrase from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. He was denied the trademark because of the brand's resemblance to the F word. A federal statute prevents trademarks from being immoral, shocking, or offensive. Last week, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments regarding the constitutionality of the rejection. Brunetti claims the rejection violates his First Amendment right. In an interview, Brunetti stated, "There's always going to be people who are offended, but you can't control how everyone thinks. When it has to do with the First Amendment, it's a slippery slope." The American Civil Liberties Union spoke out in support of Brunetti. Attorney Emerson Sykes says, "We don't want the government picking and choosing the messages it approves and disapproves of." In addition to free speech interactions, Brunetti is losing money without the trademark. Online stores like eBay and Amazon sell knockoff versions of Brunetti's design. Without the trademark, he has no grounds to shut them down. The government fears granting a trademark would allow more expletives and graphic content to enter the marketplace. Solicitor General Noel Francisco says the federal government should not be forced through the trademark system to actively promote words and images the public would find shocking or profane. A decision on the case is expected by the summer. Gilat and Elijah, back to you.
Thank you, Shruti. President Trump is facing a fresh challenge from members of the Senate and Congress over his recent veto to continue U.S. involvement in the war in Yemen. Talking Points host Elijah Shama is here to break down why Congress is challenging the president and how U.S. involvement in Saudi Arabia's war has raised eyebrows on the Hill.
Yeah, that's right. President Donald Trump issued his second veto of his presidency last week, rejecting a Senate resolution to end U.S. involvement in the Saudi-led war in Yemen. It's a decision Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont is calling on Congress to challenge, saying that Congress must now act to protect that constitutional responsibility by overriding the president's veto. But how did the war in Yemen become a flashpoint between the president and Capitol Hill? The U.S. has provided limited support for the war in Yemen since 2015, giving Saudi Arabia and its allies weapons and intelligence in a conflict that's caused a humanitarian crisis across the country. It's those human rights abuses, 10 million Yemenis sit on the verge of famine, and the Trump administration's failure to condemn Saudi Arabia for the killing of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi that led to a bipartisan passing of a Congressional War Powers resolution for the first time since 1973. Now that's opened a debate in Washington on whether or not the president has the power to wage war without congressional consent. Now that veto hasn't dampened support for ending U.S. involvement in the war that's killed over 70,000 either, with prominent U.S. senators like Chris Murphy of Connecticut calling for the consequences for Saudi handling of the war, making it clear that Trump's defense of Riyadh's airstrikes may have set off a bombshell in his own backyard.
So Elijah, why is the Trump administration still defending Saudi Arabia?
Simply put, the president says this is about economic interests. The U.S. sells a lot of weapons and buys a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia, and it has been very slow to kind of renege on any of those deals. Plus, the U.S. sees Saudi Arabia as a bulwark against Iran in the region, so it's kind of playing politics at maybe the expense of some other things.
Yeah, a lot at play there. Thank you, Elijah. And polls are closing in Egypt. The country's finishing its third day of voting today on changes to the nation's constitution, leaving the future of its leadership hanging in the balance. Stay with us. More after the break.
Well, Thomas, you've got pre-diabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have pre-diabetes. Big time.
I see you mobbing over her. Let's go. Let's mob. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, we mobbing. Come on, girl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Boom. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Boom. Hey, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Boom.
Here we go. We're gonna go out there in the rain. Gonna get wet. All right, here we go. Okay, quick. Oh yeah, yes. So much fun. Mwah. So wet.
Welcome back to Talking Points. A fictional TV president is now Ukraine's new president. Volodymyr Zelensky came away with a landslide victory yesterday in Ukraine's presidential election, winning 73% of the vote. The 41-year-old and Ukraine's first Jewish president beat incumbent and billionaire tycoon Petro Poroshenko. Zelensky is a comedian with no military background or political experience. That is, unless you count his TV show where he plays a teacher who wins the presidency as an outsider. But that's what he was in this election too. An outsider, an alternative to the establishment of Poroshenko. Yesterday was a runoff election, so voters could only choose between Zelensky and the incumbent. Poroshenko's establishment campaign preached nationalism with the slogan Army, Language, Faith. Zelensky was the alternative for those who had hoped for change since the country's revolution that put Poroshenko into power but felt they never received that change. Zelensky will govern a country that's at war with Russian proxies in the east, ranks 120th out of 180 countries on the Corruption Perception Index, and is ranked the poorest country in Europe by the International Monetary Fund.
Now, Gilat, you touched on that a little bit, but Ukraine, a very corrupt country. How does Zelensky's status as an outsider translate? Does that mean no corruption?
Well, actually, so the TV show that he was on, there's an oligarch who runs that channel that airs his TV show, and some critics are saying he's too close to this oligarch. This oligarch used to own Privat Bank, which is now a nationally owned bank, but the court said that transfer of power to the nation is illegal. So Zelensky's saying that, he is not gonna, just because he's close with the oligarch, he's not gonna give him back Privat Bank. But there are people who are still concerned about that.
A very Ukrainian story indeed.
Certainly.
Gilat, thank you. And today is the third and final day of voting in Egypt on a series of changes to their constitution, the results of which could allow current President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to stay in power until 2030. Now, here to break this down is Talking Points analyst Gabrielle Caracciolo. So, Gabrielle, 3 days of voting. What are they voting on?
Right, so there are three main parts to this. The first is that it would extend the presidential term from the current 4 years to 6 years and have a term limit of 2 terms, so it would be 2 terms of 6 years. The second refers specifically to al-Sisi. It says he's in his currently in his second presidential term. It would extend that to 6 years, and it would allow him to run for another 6-year term, which would be a total of 16 years as president if he were to win that. The third part is kind of more broader. It talks about how the president can appoint top judges, bypass some judiciary oversight, and also grants military courts more jurisdiction when it comes to trying civilians.
And I'm sure there must be people in the country who maybe are unhappy with this referendum. What criticism has it garnered?
Right, so critics are saying this would be more of a return to authoritarian rule. They're newly democratic. He's a relatively new president. But the media, the local media there is very pro-government, and this referendum was kind of rushed, happened very quickly. So there was a lot of confusion among just the average voter as to what they were voting for and why. So take a listen to what one voter actually had to say.
We don't want to limit this referendum to saying yes or no. We need to give our opinion freely. It does not matter if a person agrees or disagrees, because it is up to that person. Whether you are with or against Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, by the end we are all with Egypt. Most importantly, the election succeeds.
Now, changing the constitution, a major step in any country. What does this mean for the future of Egypt and the future of Sisi?
So for him, what it will do is if this yes vote, which is expected to happen, actually occurs, his current term will be extended, and then in 2024, he can run again, and he would actually potentially be president until 2030, 16 years total, like I said, which is a really long time, and it kind of would shape Egypt in a more authoritarian kind of rule.
All right, Gabrielle, thank you. And up next on Talking Points, looking ahead to the future. With commencement just over 2 weeks away and job offers rolling in, we're going to see where our seniors are heading after graduation. Stay with us.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
You've messed up your son's haircut.
Mom?
Do you A, try to fix it?
Like it never happened.
B, work with what you got? Or C, show solidarity?
Thank you, baby.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
It's a bittersweet show right now. It's Elijah and I's last show here on Talking Points, and it's been a great 4 years. We want to thank Aaron Lyons, our EP, and everyone else in the control room, including everyone going back to our first EP, Claire Moran.
Yes, that's right. Both me and Gilat were lucky enough to start under the tutelage of Claire Moran, and it's something we can only thank her for moving through it. We got to do 3 election specials, go to a different country together, analysts, and now anchors on this desk, and it's been quite the ride.
Quite the ride. I remember my first story was about a soda tax measure that was happening in San Francisco. Don't even remember what happened with the measure, but it's how I got my start on Talking Points.
I remember sitting at the desk with Max Darrow for the first time thinking, this man is a god. Talking about Catalonia, very, very in over my head.
In over your head. There you are, freshman year.
Yeah, it was an interesting time when I was clean shaven and thought knit ties look good, but we're going to move past that. To Gilat.
Oh, yeah, that was me. I think I was anchoring our practice show. It was called B Show back then. I'm not even sure that was live on air.
To see just how far we've come. And that's all of us as just the originals. Pour one out for Dan.
Great people. Shruti had her explainer in this show. Always great on the Supreme Courts. Freshman year banquet.
But just really sentimental towards the end.
Been a great
this station
ride.
meant a lot. It still means a lot. Thank you again to Aaron. Thank you again to everyone in control room. And that's all the time we have for Talking Points tonight. For the last time, I'm Elijah Shama.
And I'm Gilat Melamed. Thank you for watching tonight and every night, Syracuse.